There is a book so dangerous, so filled with secrets, that even the Book of Enoch seems tame by comparison. It was not simply hidden, it was shattered, scattered across the desert, buried beneath sand and stone for nearly 2,000 years. They call it the Book of Giants. It tells the story that no religious authority wanted you to hear. The wars fought by the Nephilim, the children of fallen angels, who once ruled the earth with terror and bloodshed. It speaks of their dreams, their fears, and their final desperate rebellion against heaven itself. Why was this book destroyed? Why do only fragments remain, uncovered in the caves of Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls? Perhaps because it reveals something the world was never meant to know, that the giants were not mindless monsters, but beings with souls, thoughts, and a fate more terrible than death itself. Tonight, we will open those ancient fragments once more. You don't need to watch, just listen. Close your eyes and let this story carry you back to the time before the Great Flood, when the earth trembled beneath the footsteps of giants and the sky echoed with the roar of a war that would end all wars. Rest now. Let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Forbidden Scroll. In the year 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy was searching for a lost goat among the cliffs of Qumran, near the Dead Sea. The air was dry and still, the rocks glowing golden under the relentless sun. As he climbed higher, he noticed a dark opening in the limestone, a cave hidden for centuries. He threw a stone inside, listening for the echo. Instead, he heard something break, clay shattering against rock. Curious, he climbed down into the darkness. The air was cool and thick with dust, and there, stacked against the walls, were jars. Ancient jars, sealed with hardened clay and wrapped in linen that crumbled at his touch. Inside those jars were scrolls, parchment so old it seemed ready to dissolve into powder. Texts written in languages he could not read, by hands that had been dust for 2,000 years. Word spread quickly. Scholars came from across the world. They identified fragments of the Book of Enoch, copies of the Psalms, prophecies from Isaiah, and texts no one had seen since before the time of Christ. The discovery was monumental. These were the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest biblical manuscripts ever found. But among those scrolls was something unexpected, something the scholars did not know how to categorize. Fragments written in Aramaic, covered in strange names, Oya, Hahya, Mahwe, Gilgamesh. Stories of giants who walked the earth, towering over mountains. Dreams of trees being cut down, of stones inscribed with judgment, of battles that shook the foundations of the world. Accounts of creatures so massive that their every step left craters in the ground, and whose hunger devoured entire cities. This was the Book of Giants. It had been lost for nearly 2,000 years. The early church fathers never quoted it. The rabbis rarely mentioned it. It existed only in whispers, in fragments of Manichaean texts found in the deserts of Persia and Central Asia. Most believed it was a legend, a myth that never truly existed. But here it was, broken, incomplete, but undeniably real. And when the scholars pieced together its fragments, they understood why it had been erased from history. The Book of Enoch tells us that 200 angels, called the Watchers, descended to earth, took human wives, and fathered the Nephilim. It tells us these giants brought violence and corruption upon the world, and that God judged them with the flood. It is a story of rebellion and divine justice, told from a distance with the clarity of hindsight. But the Book of Giants is different. It does not observe from afar. It takes you inside. It gives the Nephilim names, voices, thoughts. It records their conversations with their fathers, the fallen watchers. It describes the dreams that haunted them in the night, visions of their own destruction that they could not escape. The Book of Enoch speaks of the Nephilim as instruments of chaos, nameless forces of destruction. The Book of Giants lets us hear them speak. It shows us their fear as they realized their doom was coming. It reveals that they sent one of their own, a giant named Maweh, on a desperate journey to seek the prophet Enoch, to beg for understanding, to ask if there was any way to escape the judgment of heaven. And it tells us what Enoch said in return. There was no mercy, no escape. Their fate was sealed before they were born. Every one of them would die in the flood. And their spirits, those towering, powerful spirits, would be trapped on earth forever, becoming the demons that torment humanity to this very day. This was the knowledge the early church could not allow. To acknowledge that demons were once the spirits of the Nephilim, that evil had a lineage, a history, a beginning, this was too much. It blurred the lines. It gave the enemy a face, a story, a tragedy. So the book was not banned with grand pronouncements or official decrees. It was simply left out. Copies were not made. It was not included in any canon, not read in any synagogue or church. Over the centuries, it faded. The scrolls decayed. The memory dimmed. Only the desert remembered. And in 1947, the desert gave it back. The Book of Giants was not written by one hand, but by many, over generations. Scholars believe it was composed sometime between the 3rd and 1st centuries before Christ, during a period when Jewish communities were wrestling with questions about the nature of evil, the role of angels, and the mysteries of the unseen world. Some believe it was written by the Essenes, the same devout sect that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. They lived in isolation near Qumran, dedicating their lives to prayer, study, and the copying of sacred texts. They believed the end of the world was near, that they were living in the final days before God's judgment would fall. For them, the story of the Nephilim was not ancient history. It was a warning, a reminder that rebellion against God, whether by angels or by men, always ends in ruin. Others believe the Book of Giants was part of a larger tradition that spread across the ancient Near East. Fragments of similar stories have been found in Manichaean texts from Persia, written in languages like Sogdian and Middle Persian, suggesting that the tale of the giants was once known far and wide, told in many tongues, carried along trade routes from Jerusalem to the steppes of Central Asia. But whoever wrote it, one thing is clear. They wanted to preserve a truth that others were trying to bury. They wanted future generations to know what happened when the sons of God abandoned their place in heaven. They wanted the world to remember the children born from that forbidden union and the terrible price they paid. If you have heard the story of the Watchers and the Nephilim, it was likely from the Book of Enoch. That text is the foundation, the chronicle that gives us the broad outline, the descent of the angels, the corruption of mankind, the birth of the giants, and the coming of the flood. But the Book of Enoch keeps its distance. It is written like a legal document, a record of crimes and punishments. It tells us what happened, but it does not take us inside the hearts of those who lived it. The Book of Giants does. Enoch describes the Nephilim as a plague upon the earth, monstrous and brutal. The Book of Giants shows us that they were more than that. They were sons. They had fathers who taught them secrets from heaven. They had names, identities, roles. They were princes of a doomed race, born into a world that could not contain them. Enoch tells us the flood came as an act of divine justice. The Book of Giants shows us the terror in the eyes of the giants as the waters began to rise. It records their final moments, their desperate attempts to understand why they were being destroyed, their pleas to their fathers, the fallen watchers, who could do nothing to save them. Enoch ends with hope, the promise that the righteous will be saved, that God's mercy will restore the earth. The Book of Giants ends in darkness. It tells us that even after the flood, even after the bodies of the Nephilim were drowned and buried beneath the waters, their spirits did not pass away. They lingered. They became the unclean spirits, the demons that walk the earth, tormenting humanity, searching endlessly for rest they will never find. This is why the book was feared. It did not offer simple answers. It did not divide the world cleanly into good and evil. It showed the tragedy of rebellion, yes, but it also showed the tragedy of those who were born into sin, who never chose their own creation, and yet were condemned all the same. The Book of Giants gives us names. And in the ancient world, to know a name was to know the essence of a being, its nature, its fate. The greatest of the Nephilim were Oyah and Hahya, sons of Shemihazar, the leader of the Watchers, who first organized the rebellion in heaven. Their names mean groaning and crying out, and they carried that weight in everything they did. They were towering figures, so large that when they stood, their heads disappeared into the clouds. Their voices, when they spoke, rumbled like thunder across the valleys. Then there was Maweh, son of the angel Barakel. He was different from the others, quieter, more contemplative. While Oyah and Hahya ruled with strength and intimidation, Maweh was known for his speed. He could cross vast distances in moments, his stride covering miles with each step. It was said that he could fly, that the blood of his angelic father gave him the ability to rise into the air and travel between the earth and the lower heavens. There were others as well. Gilgamesh, whose name would later be remembered in Sumerian legend as a hero king, though the Book of Giants paints a darker picture. Hobabish, whose strength was unmatched even among the Nephilim. And Ahijah, who was known for his cruelty even in a race defined by violence. These were not mindless brutes. They were rulers, commanders, sons of angels who remembered heaven and longed for a glory they would never possess. And as we will see, they knew their time was running out. There is a reason the Book of Giants was not preserved alongside the Book of Enoch in the official canon. The early church fathers could tolerate the idea that angels fell, that they corrupted mankind, and that God judged them. These were lessons in obedience, warnings against pride and rebellion. But the Book of Giants went further. It suggested that the Nephilim were not simply evil, they were tragic. They had consciousness, memory, fear. They dreamed. And in those dreams, they saw their own destruction coming. It made them sympathetic. And sympathy for the children of fallen angels was a dangerous thing. If the Nephilim could be pitied, if their destruction could be questioned, then where did that leave the doctrine of divine justice? Where did that leave the teaching that God's judgments are always perfect, always without flaw? The church could not allow that question to linger, so the book was quietly set aside, not argued against, not condemned, simply forgotten. But fragments survived, hidden in jars, buried in sand, waiting. The Book of Giants does not exist as a complete manuscript. What we have are pieces, fragments of parchment, lines of Aramaic text, passages torn and faded by the passage of 2,000 years. Some fragments describe the birth of the giants, the unions between the Watchers and human women that should never have occurred. Others record conversations between the Nephilim and their fathers, moments where the fallen angels tried to teach their sons the secrets of heaven, only to realize they had created something beyond their control. Still, other fragments tell of the dreams, strange, terrifying visions that began to plague the giants in the years before the flood. Dreams of trees being felled, of gardens destroyed, of stones inscribed with words of judgment. The Nephilim did not understand these dreams, and their fear grew with each passing night. The most complete section of the Book of Giants is the account of Maweh's journey. When the dreams became unbearable, the Nephilim gathered and made a decision. They would send one of their own to find Enoch, the prophet who walked with God, the only human who had been taken into the heavenly realms and returned. If anyone could interpret their dreams, it was him. Maweh was chosen, and what happened next would seal the fate of every giant on earth. Scholars have worked for decades to piece these fragments together, comparing them with Manichaean versions found in Persia and Central Asia, filling in gaps, reconstructing sentences. Some parts of the narrative are clear, others remain mysteries, lost to time. But even in its broken state, even with entire sections missing, the Book of Giants tells a story more vivid, more haunting than almost anything else that has survived from the ancient world. You might wonder why a text written over 2,000 years ago, hidden in caves and banned by ancient authorities, should matter to us now. Because the questions it raises have never gone away. What happens when power is abused? What becomes of the children born from that abuse, who did not choose their own existence? Can beings created in rebellion ever find redemption, or are they doomed from the moment of their birth? And most importantly, where did evil come from? The Book of Giants offers an answer, not a comfortable one, not one that fits neatly into theological boxes, but an answer nonetheless. It tells us that evil is not abstract. It is not a vague force without origin or history. It has a beginning. It has names. It has a story. And if we understand that story, we might better understand the world we live in now. The battles we fight, the darkness we face, and the hope that even in the deepest night, the light of heaven has not been extinguished. The fragments had been found. The names had been spoken once more. Oya, Haya, Maweh. And now, from those ancient, broken words, a story begins to emerge. A story of births that should never have happened, of beings too powerful for the earth to contain, and of a hunger so vast it would threaten to devour all living things. Chapter 2. The Birth of the Giants. The unions between the Watchers and the daughters of men were not gentle. They were not born of love, but of desire twisted into something dark and consuming. The angels who descended had abandoned their celestial nature, and in doing so, they became something neither fully divine nor fully mortal. They were caught between two worlds, and the children born from them would be caught as well. The first births were recorded in whispers, stories passed from village to village in the years before writing became common. Women who had lain with the Watchers did not carry their children as other women did. The pregnancies were short, violent, and often fatal. The infants grew at an unnatural rate, their bodies expanding within the womb until the mothers could no longer contain them. When the first Nephilim emerged into the world, those who witnessed it could scarcely believe what they saw. These were not human children. They were something else entirely. The Book of Giants tells us that within days of birth, the Nephilim had grown to the size of full-grown men. Within weeks, they towered above the tallest humans. And by the time they reached maturity, they stood as tall as the cedars of Lebanon, their heads disappearing into the clouds when they walked. The texts describe them as being 300 cubits tall, that is, 450 feet, higher than the tallest trees, higher than most of the hills that dotted the ancient landscape. When they moved, the earth trembled. When they spoke, their voices carried for miles, echoing off mountains and across valleys like the rumble of distant thunder. But it was not only their size that set them apart. The Nephilim carried in their blood a strange mixture of the celestial and the earthly. From their fathers, they inherited strength beyond human comprehension, knowledge of the heavenly realms, and a hunger that could never be satisfied. From their mothers, they inherited physical form, mortality, and the capacity for suffering. They were beings of contradiction, powerful yet doomed. knowledgeable yet lacking wisdom, alive yet never truly belonging to the world of the living. Among the firstborn were Oya and Haya, the twin sons of Shemi-Hazar. Shemi-Hazar was the leader of the 200 watchers who had sworn the oath on Mount Hermon, the one who had convinced the others to abandon their posts and descend to earth. He had taken a human woman named Naama, and from that union came the twins. From the moment of their birth, it was clear that Oya and Haya were different even among the Nephilim. They were larger, stronger, more terrible than any who came after. Their skin was pale as stone, their eyes burned with an inner light, and their voices, when they cried out as infants, shattered the windows of every dwelling within a mile. As they grew, their father Shemi-Hazar watched with a mixture of pride and growing unease. He had sought to create sons who would rule the earth, who would establish a new order under the guidance of the Watchers. But what he saw in Oya and Haya was not kingship. It was something closer to chaos. The twins were inseparable, but they were not alike in temperament. Oya was brooding, given to long silences and sudden rages. He would spend days staring at the horizon, as if searching for something he could not name. Haya, by contrast, was restless and violent. He delighted in destruction, in testing the limits of his strength against the world around him. Together, they were a force that even their father struggled to control. Then there was Maweh, son of the angel Barakel. Barakel had been one of the watchers assigned to observe the stars, to track the movements of the heavens and ensure the cosmic order remained intact. When he descended, he brought with him knowledge of the celestial realms that even the other watchers did not possess. Maweh inherited his father's gifts. He was not as large as Oya and Haya, but he was faster, much faster. The Book of Giants describes him as being able to cross 1,000 leagues in a single day, his strides covering miles with each step. Some fragments suggest he could fly, rising into the air on wings that he inherited from his angelic lineage. Though whether these were physical wings or something more metaphorical, the texts do not make clear. What is clear is that Maweh was different. While the other Nephilim were consumed with their own power, with conquest and domination, Maweh was thoughtful. He asked questions. He sought understanding. And it would be this quality that would one day lead the Nephilim to send him on a journey that would seal their fate. There were others as well. The Book of Giants mentions Gilgamesh, whose name would echo through history long after the flood, remembered in Sumerian legend as a great king and hero. But the fragments paint a darker picture. Gilgamesh was one of the Nephilim, a giant of tremendous strength and ambition, who sought to build a kingdom that would rival heaven itself. Hobabish was known for his unmatched physical power. Even among the giants, he stood out. It was said that he could uproot mountains, that he once lifted a section of the earth itself and hurled it into the sea, creating a chasm that swallowed an entire forest. And then there was Ahijah, whose cruelty was legendary, even in a race defined by violence. While the other Nephilim killed to survive, to feed their endless hunger, Ahijah killed for pleasure. He took delight in the suffering of others, in the fear he could inspire with a single glance. These were the sons of the Watchers. These were the Nephilim. The texts tell us that there were differences among them, variations in size and ability depending on which Watcher had fathered them. The sons of Shemi-Hazar and the chief Watchers were the largest and most powerful. The sons of lesser angels were smaller, though still far beyond human scale. But all of them shared certain traits. All of them possessed strength that could shatter stone. All of them carried a hunger that grew with each passing day. And all of them, whether they knew it or not, carried within them the seeds of their own destruction. The blood of angels does not mix well with the blood of humanity. The Nephilim were never meant to exist. They were violations of the natural order, beings caught between two realms, fully at home in neither. Their very existence was an affront to the balance that God had established at the foundation of the world, and creation itself seemed to rebel against them. The land where they walked became barren. Rivers dried up in their presence. Animals fled before them, sensing something fundamentally wrong in their nature. Even the weather seemed to turn against them, as if the sky itself mourned what had been unleashed upon the earth. The Nephilim felt this rejection, though they did not understand it. They felt the weight of the world pressing down on them, the sense that they were strangers in a land that did not want them. And this feeling, more than anything else, fed the rage and hunger that would soon consume them. In the early years, the Watchers tried to guide their sons, to teach them, to mold them into the rulers they had imagined. Shemi-Hazer gathered the Nephilim and spoke to them of power, of dominion, of the right of the strong to rule over the weak. He told them that they were superior to humanity, that they were destined to establish a new order on earth. But the Nephilim were not interested in order. They were interested in satisfying the hunger that gnawed at them constantly, a hunger that grew stronger with each passing day. At first, they ate what the land provided. They consumed entire fields of grain in a single sitting. They slaughtered herds of cattle, flocks of sheep, leaving nothing behind but bones scattered across the hills. The humans watched in horror as their harvests disappeared, as their livestock vanished, as the abundance they had worked for months to cultivate was devoured in hours. But it was not enough. It was never enough. The hunger of the Nephilim was not a natural hunger. It was something deeper, something that came from the fundamental wrongness of their existence. They were beings who should never have been born, and their bodies seemed to know it, demanding more and more fuel simply to sustain themselves. And so they began to take more. They raided villages, carrying away entire storehouses of food. They hunted the wild animals until the forests were empty. They stripped the land bare, leaving behind only desolation. The humans began to starve. Families huddled in their homes, rationing what little food remained, praying to gods who seemed to have abandoned them. Parents watched their children grow thin and weak, unable to provide for them, unable to protect them from the giants who took everything. And still the Nephilim hungered. The fragments of the Book of Giants do not shy away from what happened next. They record it plainly, without embellishment, as if the horror of it speaks for itself. The Nephilim began to eat human flesh. At first, it was the bodies of the dead, those who had perished from starvation or disease. The giants would descend upon the villages at night, breaking open tombs, devouring the corpses before the sun rose. But soon, the dead were not enough. The hunger drove them further. They began to hunt the living. The Book of Giants describes it in stark terms. And they began to sin against the birds, and against the beasts, and against the reptiles, and against the fish, and they began to devour one another's flesh and to drink the blood. Entire communities disappeared overnight. Travelers who ventured too far from the safety of walled cities were never seen again. The roads became empty, the fields abandoned. Humanity retreated into whatever fortifications they could build, behind walls of stone and gates of iron, praying that the giants would pass them by. But even stone walls could not hold back the Nephilim for long. They would tear through them as easily as a man might tear through parchment, reaching inside to pluck out the people cowering within, devouring them as casually as one might eat fruit from a tree. The earth was defiled by blood. The cries of the suffering rose up to the very gates of heaven. And in the celestial realms, the faithful angels looked down in horror at what their fallen brothers had unleashed upon the world. But the worst was yet to come. For when the Nephilim had consumed every living thing they could find, when the land had been stripped bare and the humans had hidden themselves away in the deepest caves and highest mountains, the giants turned on each other. The Book of Giants records that the Nephilim began to devour one another. Brother turned against brother. The strong preyed upon the weak. Alliances formed and dissolved in a matter of hours as hunger overrode every other instinct. The wars among the giants had begun. Chapter 3. The hunger that devoured the earth. There are famines recorded throughout human history. Times when crops failed, when rivers dried up, when entire populations were reduced to desperate measures simply to survive. But the famine that came in the days of the Nephilim was different. It was not caused by drought or blight or any natural disaster. It was caused by the giants themselves. The Book of Giants tells us that the appetite of the Nephilim knew no bounds. They consumed not only food, but everything the earth could provide. And when the earth could provide no more, they turned their hunger upon the living creatures that shared the world with them. In the beginning, humanity tried to appease them. Villages would gather their harvests and present them as offerings, hoping that if they gave freely, the giants would leave them in peace. Entire communities would pool their resources, sacrificing their own sustenance to satisfy the hunger of the Nephilim. But it was never enough. A single Nephilim could consume in one day what would feed a village for a year. The texts describe them sitting in the fields, tearing through grain stores, devouring livestock whole, bones and all, and still rising from the meal unsatisfied, their eyes scanning the horizon for more. The land began to die. Fields that had once produced abundant crops turned brown and barren. Orchards withered. The very soil seemed exhausted, drained of life by the constant demand placed upon it. Rivers that had flowed for millennia slowed to a trickle, their waters consumed by the giants or poisoned by the filth they left behind. Animals disappeared from the forests. The great herds that had roamed the plains were hunted to extinction. Birds vanished from the skies, their nests raided, their eggs devoured before they could hatch. Even the fish in the seas began to dwindle as the Nephilim waded into the waters, scooping them out by the thousands, their massive hands acting as nets that nothing could escape. The world was being devoured, and humanity, caught in the middle of this consumption, began to understand that they were not observers of this tragedy. They were part of it. They were food. The first attacks on human settlements came without warning. A village would wake to find a giant standing at its edge, his shadow falling across the homes like a dark omen. The people would flee, scattering in all directions, but there was nowhere to run. The Nephilim could cover in a single stride what took a human an hour to walk. The giants would reach down, their hands closing around men, women, and children alike, lifting them into the air as easily as one might pick berries from a bush. And then, in full view of those who remained, they would devour them. The Book of Giants does not spare us the details. It tells us that the Nephilim ate human flesh raw, that the screams of the victims echoed across the valleys, that the blood ran in streams down the giants' chins and onto the ground below, staining the earth red. Those who survived these attacks fled deeper into the wilderness, into caves and canyons where they hoped the giants could not follow. They lived in darkness, venturing out only at night to forage for whatever scraps remained. They spoke in whispers, terrified that even their voices might draw the attention of the Nephilim. Parents told their children stories of a time before the giants, when the world had been safe, when there had been enough food for everyone, when the sun had shone without the shadow of terror falling across the land. But these stories felt like myths, like distant dreams of a world that had never truly existed. The children who grew up in those days knew only fear. They learned to recognize the sound of a giant's footsteps from miles away, a rhythmic trembling of the earth that set their hearts racing. They learned to hide at a moment's notice, to remain perfectly still even as the ground shook beneath them. They learned that to be seen was to die, and still the Nephilim hungered. As the population of humans dwindled, as the animals disappeared and the land turned barren, the giants found themselves facing a crisis of their own making. They had consumed everything, and now there was nothing left. The fragments tell us that the Nephilim began to fight among themselves, not over territory or honor or any of the reasons that human armies go to war, but over food. A giant who managed to catch a deer or find a hidden store of grain would be set upon by others, desperate to claim even a small portion for themselves. These fights were not brief skirmishes. They were battles that lasted for days, that tore through the landscape, that left craters in the earth and rivers running with the blood of the giants themselves. Ohia and Hahia, the twin sons of Shemi-Hazar, led different factions. Ohia gathered around him those who believed that the solution was to expand their territory, to venture into new lands where food might still be found. Hahia argued that they should consolidate their power, eliminate the weaker Nephilim, and divide the remaining resources among the strongest. The division between the brothers grew into open hostility. Where once they had been inseparable, now they could not bear to be in each other's presence. Each saw in the other a rival, a threat, an obstacle to survival. The Book of Giants describes a confrontation between them that shook the mountains. They met in a valley, surrounded by their followers, and for a moment it seemed they might find a way to reconcile. But then Hahia spoke words that could not be taken back, accusing Ohia of weakness, of sentiment, of caring too much about the humans they were meant to rule. Ohia's response was immediate. He struck his brother with such force that the sound of the blow echoed for 100 miles. Hahia staggered but did not fall. Instead, he lunged forward, and the two giants, each standing nearly 500 feet tall, collided with the force of an earthquake. The battle between them lasted 3 days. The valley where they fought was torn apart, its walls collapsing, its river diverted from its course. The smaller Nephilim fled, terrified of being caught in the destruction. Even the Watchers, the fallen angels who had fathered these giants, watched from a distance, unable or unwilling to intervene. In the end, neither brother won. Both were wounded, bleeding from injuries that would have killed any human instantly. They retreated to opposite ends of the land, and the divide between the factions of Nephilim became permanent. But the fighting did not end. If anything, it intensified. Giants who had once hunted together now turned on each other. Alliances formed overnight and dissolved by dawn. Trust became a luxury that none could afford. The texts describe scenes of horror that are difficult to comprehend. A Nephilim named Hobabish, driven mad by hunger, attacked and killed his own brother, devouring his flesh in a desperate attempt to sustain himself. Another giant, whose name is lost to the fragments, was surrounded by a group of younger Nephilim and torn apart, his body divided among them like meat at a feast. The earth, already stained with the blood of humans and animals, now ran red with the blood of the giants themselves. The air was thick with the stench of death. Vultures circled overhead. Though even they were not safe, the Nephilim would leap into the air to snatch them down, consuming them feathers and all. And through it all, the hunger remained. It was a hunger that no amount of food could satisfy, a gnawing emptiness that seemed to grow with each passing day. The Nephilim ate and ate, and yet they felt themselves starving. The Book of Giants suggests that this hunger was not merely physical. It was spiritual. The Nephilim were beings divided within themselves, carrying the blood of both heaven and earth, fully belonging to neither. They were trapped in bodies that constantly demanded more, souls that could never find rest, existences that were fundamentally wrong. They ate to fill a void that could not be filled. They killed to silence a pain that could not be silenced. They raged against a world that rejected them, against a creator who had never intended for them to exist. And in their rage, they destroyed everything they touched. The humans who survived began to pray. They gathered in the deepest caves, in the highest mountains, in any place where the giants could not easily reach them, and they lifted their voices to heaven. They begged for deliverance, for mercy, for an end to the nightmare that had consumed their world. They prayed to the God who had made them, who had given them the earth as a home, who had promised to watch over them. They reminded him of his covenant, of his love for humanity, of the promise that he would not abandon his creation. And in the celestial realms, their prayers were heard. The four great archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, stood before the throne of the Most High and reported what they had witnessed. They described the desolation of the earth, the blood that covered the land, the cries of the innocent that had reached the gates of heaven. They described the Nephilim, the abominations born from the unions between the Watchers and human women, beings who had turned the earth into a realm of death and terror. And they asked for permission to act. The answer came swiftly. The Nephilim would be destroyed. Every one of them would perish. Their bodies would be swept away, and their spirits would be bound to the earth, unable to find rest until the final judgment. The Watchers, their fathers, would be imprisoned in the depths of the earth, chained in darkness until the end of days. And the world would be cleansed by water, washed clean of every trace of corruption, so that humanity might begin again. But before the judgment fell, something strange began to happen. The Nephilim, those towering beings of destruction and chaos, began to dream, and in those dreams they saw their doom approaching. Chapter 4. The Giants Learn Forbidden Secrets. The Watchers had not descended to earth without purpose. When they abandoned their posts in the celestial realms, when they swore their oath on Mount Hermon and took human wives, they brought with them something far more dangerous than their own presence. They brought knowledge. Knowledge that had been sealed in heaven since the foundation of the world. Secrets that were never meant to pass into mortal hands. Mysteries of creation, of power, of the hidden workings of the cosmos that God himself had kept veiled from humanity. And they taught these secrets to their sons. The Book of Giants tells us that each of the chief watchers specialized in different forms of forbidden knowledge. Azazel, whom we know from the Book of Enoch as the teacher of weapon-making and cosmetics, continued his work among the Nephilim, instructing them in arts of war and vanity. But he was not alone. Each of the 200 fallen angels brought their own expertise, their own piece of the celestial puzzle. And the Nephilim, with their mixed blood and their towering intellects, absorbed it all. Shemi-Hazar, the leader of the Watchers, gathered his sons Ohia and Hahia and taught them the art of enchantments. He showed them how to bind spirits with words, how to command the forces of nature through incantations, how to manipulate the invisible threads that connected all living things. The twins learned quickly, too quickly. Within months, they could summon storms with a whisper, could cause the earth to tremble with a gesture, could strike a man dead from a mile away without ever touching him. They wore this power like a cloak, reveling in the fear it inspired, using it to dominate the lesser Nephilim and terrorize any humans who dared to resist them. But Ohia was not satisfied with mere power. He wanted understanding. Late at night, when Hahia was consumed with displays of strength and violence, Ohia would sit with his father and ask questions that even Shemi-Hazar struggled to answer. Why do we exist? Ohia would ask. If we are neither angel nor human, what are we? What is our purpose? Shemi-Hazar had no good answers. He would speak of destiny, of strength, of the right of the powerful to shape the world according to their will. But even as he spoke these words, doubt crept into his voice. He had led the Watchers in their rebellion, convinced that they could create something better than what God had ordained. But looking at his sons at their endless hunger, their capacity for destruction, their fundamental wrongness, he began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Still, he taught them. He taught them because it was all he had left to give, because in teaching he could pretend that their existence had meaning, that there was still a future for the race he had helped create. Barakel, the watcher who had been assigned to observe the stars, took his son Mahweh aside and revealed to him the secrets of the heavens. He taught him the names of the stars, the paths they traveled across the night sky, the celestial calendar that governed the seasons and the years. But more than that, he taught Mahweh how to navigate between the realms. He showed him the gates that connected earth to the lower heavens, the pathways that angels used to travel between the worlds. He explained the hierarchy of creation, the levels of existence that stretched from the depths of the earth to the throne of God himself. Mahweh listened with an intensity that frightened even his father. Unlike the other Nephilim, who cared only for physical power and immediate gratification, Mahweh hungered for knowledge. He wanted to understand the nature of reality itself, to grasp the fundamental truths that lay beneath the surface of existence. "Father," he asked one evening as they stood beneath the stars, "if we are forbidden to exist, if our very birth was a violation of divine law, then what happens to us when we die? Where do our souls go?" Barakel had no answer. He had never considered the question. Angels did not die, they were eternal beings, created before time began. Humans died, and their souls passed into whatever realm God had prepared for them. But the Nephilim, beings caught between two natures, had no clear place in the order of creation. The silence that followed Mahweh's question stretched on for hours, and in that silence, both father and son felt the weight of a truth they did not want to acknowledge, that the Nephilim might be doomed not only in life, but in death as well. Azazel, meanwhile, had turned his attention to warfare. He had taught humans how to forge swords and cast spears in the years before the flood, and now he brought that same knowledge to the Nephilim, refining it, expanding it, making it deadlier than anything the world had yet seen. The giants learned to create weapons scaled to their enormous size. Swords as long as ships, capable of cleaving through stone. Spears that could be hurled for miles, punching through mountains. Shields forged from metals that no human blacksmith had ever worked with, harder than iron, lighter than bronze. But Azazel taught them more than just weapon making. He taught them strategy, tactics, the art of organized warfare. The Nephilim had always been violent, but their violence had been chaotic, driven by hunger and rage. Under Azazel's instruction, they learned to channel that violence, to use it as a tool to wage war with purpose and precision. They learned to build fortifications, massive structures of stone that could withstand any assault. They learned to organize themselves into armies, to establish chains of command, to coordinate their movements across vast distances. They learned to siege, to blockade, to starve out their enemies rather than simply crushing them with brute force. The wars between the Nephilim, which had been brutal but disorganized, became something far more terrible. Battles that had once lasted days now stretched into weeks. Entire regions became war zones. The landscape itself transformed into a weapon as the giants learned to use terrain, weather, and geography to their advantage. And through it all, Azazel watched with satisfaction. He had been cast down from heaven for teaching forbidden knowledge to humanity. Now he was teaching that same knowledge to beings far more powerful, far more dangerous. It was, in his twisted mind, a kind of revenge. There were other teachers as well. Kokabiel taught the Nephilim the signs of the stars, the omens that could be read in the heavens, the ways to predict the future by observing celestial movements. Tamiel taught them astrology, the belief that the stars could influence events on Earth, that by understanding their patterns, one could gain power over fate itself. Asbeel taught them to lie, to deceive, to manipulate. He showed them how to use words as weapons, how to turn allies against each other, how to sow discord and confusion among their enemies. Under his instruction, the Nephilim became not just warriors but politicians, schemers, masters of intrigue. Gadriel taught them the art of making armor, not just physical protection but mystical defenses, wards that could turn aside curses and enchantments. He taught them how to inscribe symbols of power onto their weapons and fortifications, how to draw on forces that existed beyond the material world. Each of these teachings added another layer to the knowledge possessed by the Nephilim. They became not just giants, not just monsters of appetite and violence, but something more complex. They became warrior sorcerers, beings who could command both physical and spiritual power, who understood the hidden mechanisms of creation and knew how to manipulate them for their own ends. And as their knowledge grew, so did their ambition. The greatest of the Nephilim began to dream of something more than mere survival. They began to imagine themselves as rulers not just of earth, but of the lower heavens as well. They spoke of storming the celestial gates, of overthrowing the archangels, of taking their place among the divine powers. Ohia was the loudest voice in these discussions. He had inherited his father's pride, and with it came a refusal to accept that the Nephilim were meant to be subordinate to anyone. "We carry the blood of heaven," he would declare to those who gathered around him. "We are stronger than any human, more knowledgeable than any creature of earth. Why should we bow to a God who never wanted us to exist? Why should we accept judgment from beings who fear what we might become?" His words found fertile ground. Many of the Nephilim, sensing that their time was growing short, that something terrible was approaching, rallied to Oya's banner. They began to fortify their strongholds, to gather weapons, to prepare for a war that would determine the fate of both earth and heaven. But not all the Nephilim agreed. Mawe, for all the knowledge his father had taught him, remained skeptical. He had learned enough about the structure of creation to understand how vast it truly was, how small even the Nephilim were in comparison to the powers that ruled the cosmos. "We are mighty," he would say, "but we are not eternal. We are powerful, but we are not invincible. The angels who cast down our fathers did so with ease. What makes you think we can succeed where they failed?" His caution was dismissed as cowardice. The war faction among the Nephilim was growing, fed by pride and desperation in equal measure. They would not accept that their existence was a mistake, that they were doomed from birth. They would fight, and in fighting, they would force heaven to acknowledge them as something more than abominations to be erased. But even as they prepared for war, even as they forged their weapons and strengthened their fortifications and trained for the battles to come, something was happening that none of them could explain. They began to dream, and the dreams were unlike anything they had experienced before. Not the ordinary visions that come in sleep, but something deeper, more vivid, more real. Dreams that felt like prophecies, like messages from a realm beyond their understanding. Dreams that spoke of their end. Chapter 5. The Dreams of Doom. It began with Oya, the greatest of the Nephilim, the one who spoke loudest about war and conquest, the one who refused to bow to any authority. He was the first to dream. He saw himself standing in a vast garden, more beautiful than anything on earth. Trees stretched toward the sky, their branches heavy with fruit, their leaves shimmering with a light that seemed to come from within. Flowers bloomed in every color imaginable, and the air was filled with a music so sweet it made his heart ache. In the dream, Oya walked through this garden, and despite his enormous size, the plants did not bend beneath his feet. Birds sang in the branches above him, and for the first time in his existence, he felt something other than hunger and rage. He felt peace. But then the sky darkened. Clouds gathered overhead, black and heavy, and a wind began to blow. Not a natural wind, but one that carried with it a sense of judgment, of finality. From the clouds descended figures, beings of light, terrible and beautiful, with wings that spanned the heavens and eyes that blazed like stars. They carried tools Oya did not recognize at first. Axes, saws, instruments of cutting and felling. The beings moved through the garden with purpose, and wherever they went, they cut. Trees fell, their great trunks crashing to the ground. Flowers were trampled beneath celestial feet. The fruit rotted on the vine, turning black and foul. Oya tried to stop them. He ran toward the nearest figure, reaching out to grab it, to halt the destruction. But his hands passed through the being as if it were made of smoke. He shouted, but his voice made no sound. He was powerless, a spectator to the annihilation of beauty. The garden was reduced to nothing. Bare earth, scorched and empty. The music stopped. The light faded. And in the silence that followed, Oya heard a voice, deep and resonant, speaking words he could not quite understand, but whose meaning was unmistakable. Your time is finished. All that you are will be cut down. Nothing will remain. He woke, gasping, his massive body drenched in sweat despite the cool night air. The dream clung to him like a shroud. He tried to dismiss it as meaningless, as the product of an unsettled mind. But even as he told himself this, he knew it was not true. The dream was a message, and he was terrified of what it meant. Within days, Hahia experienced a similar vision. In his dream, he stood before an enormous stone tablet, inscribed with writing he could not read. The symbols glowed with an inner fire, and as he watched, more words appeared, etching themselves into the stone as if carved by an invisible hand. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that these were judgments. Sentences being written against him, against his brother, against all the Nephilim. The tablet grew larger as he watched, expanding until it towered over him, each new line of text another condemnation. He tried to destroy it. He struck the tablet with all his strength, blows that would have shattered mountains. But the stone did not crack. It did not even vibrate. His attacks left no mark, and the words continued to appear, line after line, until the entire surface was covered. And then the tablet began to fall. Slowly at first, tilting forward, then faster, gaining momentum. Haya tried to run, but his feet were rooted to the ground. He could only watch as the massive stone rushed toward him, knowing that when it struck, he would be crushed beneath the weight of his own condemnation. He woke before impact, but the terror remained. The twins did not speak to each other about their dreams. Pride kept them silent, unwilling to admit that they had been shaken by something as intangible as visions in the night. But they watched each other carefully, and each saw in the other's eyes a reflection of his own fear. Other Nephilim began to report similar experiences. Gilgamesh dreamed of a great fire that consumed everything he had built, reducing his cities to ash. Hobabish saw himself sinking into the earth, pulled down into darkness by hands he could not see, buried alive in a tomb from which there was no escape. The dreams varied in detail, but they all carried the same message. Destruction was coming. Total, absolute, unavoidably. The Nephilim gathered to discuss what was happening. Never before had so many of them come together peacefully, without fighting or displays of dominance. The dreams had shaken them, had broken through their pride, and forced them to acknowledge that something was wrong. Mahwe stood before the assembly and spoke with a calm that few of them possessed. "These are not ordinary dreams," he said. "They are visions sent from beyond our realm. Messages meant to warn us or perhaps to announce what has already been decided." "Who sends them?" demanded Oya. "Our fathers. The Watchers." "No," Mahwe replied. "The Watchers are as trapped as we are. They descended to earth and cannot return to heaven. Whatever power is sending these visions comes from higher still, from God himself, whispered one of the smaller Nephilim, and a chill passed through the assembly. If that is true, said Hahia, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, then these dreams are not warnings. They are sentences. We are being told that we are doomed. Perhaps, Marway agreed, but we do not know for certain. The dreams are symbols, images, not clear statements. Someone must interpret them. Someone who understands the language of heaven. Who? Asked Ohia. Our fathers cannot help us. They fell because they defied that language. Who else could possibly understand? Marway's answer was immediate. Enoch. The name hung in the air. Enoch, the prophet who walked with God. Enoch, the only human who had been taken into the celestial realms and returned. Enoch, who had seen the workings of creation from the inside, who had stood before the throne of the Most High and lived to speak of it. If anyone could interpret the dreams of the Nephilim, it was him. Where is he? Demanded Hahia. Does he still live? He lives, said Marway. He dwells far from here, in a land beyond the eastern mountains. My father told me of him, warned me never to seek him out, for his words carry the authority of heaven itself. Then we will send someone to find him, said Oya. We will bring him here and force him to tell us what these dreams mean. You cannot force Enoch to do anything, Marway replied. He is protected by powers far greater than ours. But perhaps he might be willing to speak if approached with respect rather than threats. The assembly debated for hours. Some argued that seeking Enoch was a sign of weakness, that the Nephilim should trust in their own strength rather than begging for answers from a mere human. Others countered that knowledge was power, that understanding what was coming would allow them to prepare, possibly even to fight against it. In the end, it was decided. They would send an emissary to Enoch, someone fast enough to make the journey before the dreams drove them all to madness. Someone intelligent enough to ask the right questions and remember the answers. Someone who, unlike most of the Nephilim, still possessed a measure of self-control. They would send Marway. He accepted the task without hesitation, though he knew what it might cost him. To seek out Enoch was to acknowledge that the Nephilim needed help, that they could not solve this problem through strength alone. It was an admission of weakness that would not sit well with many of his brethren. But Marway had seen enough to know that strength alone would not save them. The dreams were getting worse, coming more frequently, lasting longer. Some of the Nephilim had stopped sleeping altogether, terrified of what they might see when they closed their eyes. If there was any chance of understanding what was happening, of learning whether their fate was truly sealed, or if there was still time to change it, that chance lay with Enoch. The night before he departed, Marway stood alone on a high plateau, looking up at the stars his father had taught him to read. He traced the familiar constellations, the celestial pathways he had memorized, and wondered if he would ever see them again. The journey to Enoch would take him through lands he had never traveled, past the edges of the known world, into regions where even the Nephilim did not venture. He would have to fly, using the gifts inherited from his angelic father, crossing vast distances at speeds no earthbound creature could match. And at the end of that journey, he would stand before a man who spoke with the voice of God himself and ask a question to which he already knew, in his heart, the answer. But he had to try. For himself, for his brothers, for the strange, doomed race of which he was a part. As the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Marway spread his wings, not physical appendages, but manifestations of his celestial heritage, visible only when he willed them to be, and leaped into the air. The wind caught him, and he rose higher and higher until the earth below became a patchwork of shadows and light. He flew eastward, toward the mountains where the sun was born, toward the dwelling place of the prophet, toward the truth that he both longed for and dreaded. Behind him, the Nephilim watched his departure in silence. Some felt hope perhaps Maway would return with news that they could be saved, that their dreams were false warnings, that there was still a future for them. Others felt only despair. They knew, even if they could not admit it, that Maway's journey was not a quest for salvation, but a final attempt to understand their damnation. And in the celestial realms, the faithful angels watched as well. They saw Maway's flight, saw the desperation that drove him, saw the impossible hope that he carried, and they knew what Enoch would tell him when he arrived. There would be no mercy. No escape. The sentence had been pronounced before the Nephilim were even born. Their destruction was not a possibility to be avoided. It was an inevitability already set in motion. All that remained was for them to learn the truth. Chapter 6. Enoch's Terrible Prophecy. The journey took Maway across lands that had never known the footsteps of giants. He flew over mountain ranges so high their peaks pierced the clouds, over deserts where no rain had fallen in living memory, over forests so dense that sunlight never touched the ground. His wings, those manifestations of his angelic heritage, carried him tirelessly eastward toward the edge of the world where earth met the lower heavens. He flew for days without stopping, without rest, driven by an urgency he could not fully explain. The dreams that plagued his brothers had begun to touch him as well. Not every night, but often enough. He would see images of water rising, of the earth convulsing, of voices crying out in languages he almost understood but could not quite grasp. The land below began to change. The familiar territories gave way to regions he knew only from his father's teachings. Mountains that marked the boundaries between the earthly realm and the celestial gates. Valleys where the air itself seemed to shimmer with otherworldly light. Places where the fabric between worlds grew thin, where a being with the right knowledge could pass from one realm to another. Barakel had taught him the signs to look for, certain configurations of stars visible even in daylight, rock formations that defied natural explanation, rivers that flowed uphill. These were the markers that indicated proximity to the dwelling places of prophets and holy men, those rare humans who could exist in both worlds simultaneously. On the seventh day of his flight, Maway saw it. A garden unlike anything on earth, yet clearly existing within the earthly realm. Trees of impossible beauty, bearing fruit that glowed with inner light. Flowers that actually sang as the wind passed through them. And in the center of this paradise, a simple dwelling made of living wood, its walls growing from the earth itself, its roof woven from branches that never shed their leaves. This was the dwelling of Enoch. Maway descended slowly, carefully. He knew that to approach carelessly would be to invite rejection, or worse. The stories told of Enoch said that he was protected not just by his own righteousness, but by the direct intervention of celestial powers. Angels stood guard over him, invisible but ever present. To threaten him would be to invite immediate destruction. As his feet touched the ground, Maway felt his size diminish. Not physically, he remained a giant, towering over the trees, but spiritually. In the presence of this place, his power seemed small, his knowledge incomplete, his very existence questionable. A figure emerged from the dwelling, a man, small by any measure, barely reaching the height of Maway's ankle. Yet there was something about him that commanded attention. His face was lined with age, yet his eyes held a clarity that seemed ageless. He wore simple robes, but they shone with a purity that made even the celestial garments of the watchers seem dull by comparison. This was Enoch, the seventh generation from Adam, the one who walked with God. "I have been expecting you, son of Barakel," Enoch said, and his voice, though quiet, carried across the entire garden as if he stood at Mahwe's ear. Your brother's dreams have reached even here. The cries of the earth have gone up to heaven, and the answer has been given. You have come seeking interpretation of visions, but what you truly seek is hope, and I fear I have none to give you. Mahwe knelt, bringing his massive frame as low as he could without crushing the delicate landscape around him. "Prophet," he said, his voice trembling despite his efforts to remain steady, "we dream of destruction, of judgment, of an end we cannot escape. Tell me, are these dreams true? Is there no path forward for us? We did not choose to be born. We did not ask for this existence. Is there truly no mercy for those who never chose their sin?" Enoch's expression softened with something that might have been pity, but his words remained firm. "Your question carries weight, Mahwe. It is the question of all who suffer for circumstances beyond their control. But the answer does not change because the question is painful. I have stood before the throne of the Most High. I have heard the decree pronounced. I will tell you what has been shown to me, though it will bring you no comfort." The prophet closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was no longer merely his own, but carried an echo of something far greater, as if the words came from beyond him, through him. "Thus says the Lord of Spirits, the Most High God, creator of heaven and earth, the watchers who descended from their holy dwelling, who abandoned their station and defiled themselves with the daughters of men, have transgressed my law. They have corrupted my creation and brought violence upon the earth. For this, they shall be bound in the valleys of the earth, imprisoned in darkness until the great day of judgment." Mahwe's heart sank, but Enoch was not finished. "And concerning their offspring, the Nephilim, the giants who walk the earth, hear the word of the Lord. You are beings who should not exist. Your very nature is a violation of the order I established at the foundation of the world. You carry within you both the eternal and the temporal, the celestial and the earthly, and this mixture cannot stand. You have consumed the labor of men. You have devoured beast and bird and fish. You have turned upon each other and upon those who gave you birth. The earth groans under your footsteps. The sky weeps at your existence. Creation itself cries out for your removal." The words struck Mahwe like physical blows. Each sentence carried a weight that pressed down on him, forcing him lower until his face nearly touched the ground. Enoch continued, and now his voice held a terrible finality. "Therefore this is the decree. Every Nephilim shall perish. Not one shall be spared. Your bodies shall be destroyed in the judgment that is coming. A flood shall cover the earth, waters rising from below and pouring from above, until every living thing that walks upon dry land is swept away. The world shall be cleansed of your presence, washed clean of the blood you have spilled and the corruption you have spread. But our spirits," Mahwe asked, his voice barely a whisper, "what becomes of our spirits when our bodies die?" This was the question that haunted him most. Angels were eternal. When they fell, they were imprisoned, but they did not cease to exist. Humans died, and their spirits passed to whatever realm God had prepared for them. But the Nephilim existed in between. What happened to beings who were neither one nor the other? Enoch's expression grew darker. "Your spirits shall not pass to rest. They shall not ascend to any heavenly realm, nor shall they descend to the place prepared for human souls. You are hybrids, anomalies, and there is no place for you in the order of creation. Therefore, your spirits shall remain on earth, trapped between life and death, unable to find peace." "For how long?" Mahwe's voice broke on the question. "Until the final judgment. Until the end of all things, when heaven and earth are remade. Your spirits shall wander the earth as evil spirits, as demons, tormenting humanity, seeking bodies to inhabit, longing for the physical existence you once possessed, but will never have again. You will be the source of sickness, of madness, of possession. You will be the invisible terrors that plague mankind through all generations. This is your sentence. This is your fate. The garden fell silent. Even the singing flowers had stopped their music. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mahweh remained prostrate, unable to move, unable to speak. The full weight of the prophecy crushed down on him. Not just death, he could have accepted death. But this, to exist in eternal torment, to become creatures of hatred and suffering, to spend eons trapped in a state worse than any death. Is there no appeal? He finally managed to ask. No way to change this. Could we not flee to the ends of the earth? Could we not beg forgiveness, offer penance, do anything to alter this course? Enoch shook his head slowly. The decree has been sealed. Even before you were born, even before the watchers descended, this end was foreseen. The Lord is not acting in haste or in anger. This is justice, carried out according to laws older than the earth itself. You ask if there is mercy for those who never chose their sin, and I tell you there is mercy. The mercy is that you are being told the truth. The mercy is that you have time to prepare. The mercy is that your end, though terrible, is not without purpose. From your destruction, humanity will learn. From your fate, future generations will understand the cost of rebellion against the natural order. That is not mercy, Mahweh said quietly. That is being made an example. Yes, Enoch agreed. It is both, and that is all that can be offered. The prophet reached into his robe and withdrew a small scroll. I have written down what has been shown to me. The full prophecy, the complete judgment. Take this to your brothers. Let them read what awaits them. Let them know that their dreams speak truth. The garden will be cut down. The stones of judgment have been inscribed. The waters are already beginning to gather in the deep places of the earth. There is no escape. There is no reprieve. There is only the time between now and then. Use it as you will. Mahweh took the scroll carefully, his massive hand trembling as he held the tiny piece of parchment. It weighed almost nothing, yet it felt heavier than mountains. How long? He asked. How much time do we have? The Lord has granted you 120 years from this day. 120 years until the fountains of the great deep burst forth and the windows of heaven are opened. 120 years to make peace with your existence and your end. 120 years. It sounded like a long time, but Mahweh knew it was nothing. A blink, a breath, barely enough time to comprehend what was coming, let alone prepare for it. He rose slowly, the scroll clutched in his hand. Thank you, prophet, for your honesty. Though the message brings only despair, at least now we know the truth. Truth is never despair, Mahweh, Enoch said gently. Despair is living in uncertainty, in false hope. You know what is coming. Now you must decide what to do with that knowledge. Will you spend your remaining time in violence and rage? Or will you seek some other path? I cannot tell you what to choose. That is yours alone. Mahweh spread his wings once more. As he lifted into the air, Enoch called out one final word. Remember this, son of Barakel. Though you are condemned, though your existence is a violation, you are still capable of choice. That has not been taken from you. How you face your end will define whether you were truly monsters or whether you were tragic beings caught in a fate not of your making. The giant flew westward, back toward the lands where his brothers waited. The scroll in his hand felt like it was burning, though it remained cool to the touch. He knew what it contained. He knew what reaction it would provoke. And he knew that when he delivered this message, when the Nephilim learned that there was no hope, no escape, no mercy, the wars would truly begin. Chapter 7. The Nephilim wars begin. The assembly of the Nephilim gathered in a valley that had once been fertile but was now a wasteland, trampled and barren from their constant presence. They came from all directions, from the north where the mountains touched the sky, from the south where the deserts stretched endlessly, from the east and west where they had carved out territories and built fortresses of stone. Hundreds of them, perhaps not all who remained. Some were too proud or too isolated to answer the call, but enough. Enough to make the earth tremble beneath their collective weight. Enough to darken the sky with their shadows. Mahwe descended from above, landing in the center of the gathering. His journey had taken weeks, and in that time the dreams had grown worse. Every Nephilim in the assembly bore the marks of sleepless nights, eyes sunken, movements agitated, tempers short. "You have returned," Oya said, stepping forward. His voice carried hope despite his efforts to sound neutral. "What did the prophet say? Can the dreams be stopped? Can our fate be changed?" Mahwe said nothing. He simply held up the scroll Enoch had given him. Hahya snatched it from his hand, unrolling the parchment with such force it nearly tore. His eyes scanned the words written there, and with each line, his expression darkened. When he finished, he looked up at the assembled giants, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "It is a death sentence," he said flatly. "All of us. Every single one. We are to be destroyed in a flood, drowned like rats. And our spirits," his voice broke, "our spirits are cursed to wander the earth as demons until the end of time." The assembly erupted. Some roared in anger, others in despair. Some began to weep, sounds that shook the ground like earthquakes. Others lashed out, striking the earth or each other, unable to contain the fury that rose within them. "No," shouted Gilgamesh. "This cannot be. We are the mighty. We are the sons of heaven. How can mere water destroy us?" "Because it is not mere water," Mahwe said quietly, though his voice still carried across the chaos. "It is the judgment of the Most High. It is water called forth by the very power that spoke creation into being. No strength we possess can stand against it." "Then we fight," Haya declared. "If we are to die, we die as warriors, not as victims cowering in fear. Let heaven send its flood, we will meet it with defiance." "Fight what?" Mahwe asked. "Water. How do you wage war against the rain?" "Not the water," Oya interjected, his voice cutting through the tumult. "The ones who send it. The angels. The archangels who serve the Most High. If they are coming to destroy us, then let them face us in battle. Let them know that we will not go quietly into oblivion." A roar of approval rose from many of the assembled Nephilim. Here, finally, was something they understood. Not abstract prophecies or inevitable doom, but a fight. An enemy they could face, weapons they could cross, a battle they could wage. But not all agreed. "This is madness," said one of the smaller giants, a son of the Watcher Ramiel. "We cannot defeat the archangels. They cast down our fathers with ease. What makes you think we can succeed where the Watchers failed?" "Our fathers were unprepared," Oya countered. "They were caught off guard, still clinging to the hope that they might be forgiven. We have no such illusions. We know we are condemned. That gives us strength. They never had the strength of those with nothing left to lose." The argument raged for hours. The Nephilim divided into factions, each with different ideas about how to face the coming judgment. Some sided with Oya and Haya, advocating for war, for gathering weapons and fortifying positions, and preparing to fight the angelic hosts when they came. Others argued for submission, for spending their remaining years in repentance, hoping that perhaps at the last moment mercy might be granted. A third group, smaller but no less vocal, proposed flight. "The world is vast," they argued. Perhaps we can find places where the flood will not reach. The highest mountains, the deepest caves, places where we can hide until the waters recede. Mawe listened to it all and said nothing. He knew the truth that none of them wanted to accept. There was no hiding from a judgment that covered the entire earth. There was no repentance that could undo the fundamental wrongness of their existence. And there was no victory to be won in a war against heaven itself. But he also knew that trying to convince them was futile. They would have to learn these truths for themselves in blood and suffering and final, desperate moments when the waters closed over their heads. In the end, the war faction won, not through logic or persuasion, but through sheer force of personality. Ohia and Hahia were the greatest of the Nephilim, and when they declared their intention to fight, most of the others fell in line. Those who disagreed were given a choice: join the war effort or be declared enemies. In a race already tearing itself apart from hunger and violence, neutrality was not an option. The preparations began immediately. The Nephilim scattered to their territories, gathering weapons, conscripting the smaller giants into their armies, building fortifications that they hoped might withstand both earthly and celestial assault. But almost as quickly as the war preparations began, the conflict started. Not with heaven, the angels had not yet descended, but among the Nephilim themselves. Resources were scarce. The land had been stripped bare by years of overconsumption, and there was not enough food or materials to sustain multiple armies. Giants who had once been allies became competitors, then rivals, then enemies. The first battle broke out over a weapons cache. A group of Nephilim loyal to Gilgamesh had discovered a deposit of strange metal, harder than iron and lighter than bronze, perfect for forging the massive weapons they needed. But Hahia claimed the territory belonged to him, that his forces had already laid claim to it. Neither side would back down. Within hours, they came to blows. The battle lasted 3 days and nights. The sound of it carried for hundreds of miles the clash of massive weapons, the roar of giants locked in combat, the rumble of the earth splitting beneath their feet. When it was over, a dozen Nephilim lay dead, their enormous bodies sprawled across the landscape like fallen mountains. The metal deposit had been destroyed in the fighting, buried under rubble, useless to anyone. But the precedent had been set. If Nephilim could kill each other over metal, they could kill each other over anything. And they did. Territory disputes escalated into full-scale wars. Giants who had fought side by side against human settlements now turned their weapons on each other. Ancient grudges, previously suppressed in the interest of survival, now erupted with volcanic fury. Ohia and Hahia, the twin brothers who had once been inseparable, found themselves on opposite sides of a growing divide. Ohia believed the Nephilim should unite, should pool their resources and present a unified front against heaven. Hahia believed the opposite, that only the strongest deserved to survive, that the weak should be eliminated now to conserve resources for those who might actually stand a chance. Their philosophical disagreement became personal, then violent. They met on a plain between two mountains, each commanding an army of lesser giants, and for a week they fought. The battle between Ohia and Hahia became legendary even among the Nephilim. They were perfectly matched in size, strength, and skill. Neither could gain the advantage. They fought with weapons, then without, tearing at each other with their bare hands, grappling like titans from the ancient stories. The land where they fought was forever changed. A lake appeared where there had been only dry ground, formed from the blood they spilled. Mountains crumbled from the force of bodies slammed against them. Rivers changed their courses to flow around the craters left by their impacts. In the end, both brothers survived, but barely. They retreated to opposite ends of the known world, and the Nephilim race was irreparably divided. What followed was chaos. With no central authority, with no shared purpose beyond a vague notion of defying heaven, the giants descended into an orgy of violence that made their previous brutality seem almost restrained by comparison. They fought over territory, over food, over weapons, over perceived insults and ancient grudges, and sometimes over nothing at all. They fought because fighting was all they knew, because violence was the only language they truly understood, because in the absence of any hope for the future, destroying each other in the present was the only thing that made them feel alive. The Book of Giants records these wars in fragments, snapshots of carnage that speak to a larger horror. A Nephilim named Barakel the Younger, killing his own father, the Watcher Barakel, in a rage over being born into a doomed existence. Giants forming temporary alliances only to betray each other when the opportunity arose. Entire regions becoming uninhabitable, not from the flood that was coming, but from the wars that preceded it. And through it all, the humans watched. Those who survived, who had hidden themselves in the deepest caves and highest mountains, peered out at the spectacle of the giants destroying each other and wondered if perhaps they might not need to wait for divine intervention after all. Perhaps the Nephilim would simply eliminate themselves. But that hope was short-lived, because even as they fought among themselves, the Nephilim did not forget about humanity. They still needed to eat. And when giant fought giant, the losers and the bystanders alike still turned their hunger upon the nearest available prey. Entire human settlements disappeared overnight, caught between warring factions of Nephilim who saw them as nothing more than provisions. The death toll among humanity climbed higher than it had ever been, not from organized predation but from collateral damage, from being in the wrong place when giants chose to wage war there. The earth was dying, not slowly, not gradually, but rapidly, violently, hemorrhaging life with each passing day. The wars between the Nephilim were the final convulsions of a world that had been mortally wounded the moment the Watchers descended. And in heaven, the angels watched and waited. The decree had been given, the judgment was set. All that remained was for the appointed time to arrive. 120 years, Enoch had said. But already decades had passed in war and violence. The time was growing short. The fountains of the deep were beginning to stir. The windows of heaven were preparing to open. The Nephilim wars had begun in defiance, in a desperate attempt to assert control over a fate they could not change. But they would end in terror, in the final realization that all their strength, all their knowledge, all their fury meant nothing in the face of divine judgment. The flood was coming, and nothing they did, no war they won, no fortress they built, no weapon they forged would stop it. Chapter 8. The Flood and the Final Battle. The sky began to change in ways that even the oldest living creatures had never witnessed. Clouds gathered on the horizon, not the normal white or gray of rain clouds, but something darker, heavier, tinged with colors that had no names. They moved against the wind, converging from all directions toward a single point above the earth, as if summoned by a voice no mortal ear could hear. The Nephilim noticed it first. Their angelic blood gave them sensitivity to celestial movements, and they felt the shift in the atmosphere like a pressure against their skin. The air grew thick, hard to breathe despite their enormous lungs. The ground beneath their feet began to feel unstable, as if the very foundation of the world was loosening. Mahwe stood alone on a high plateau, watching the skies. He had withdrawn from the wars, refusing to participate in the fratricidal violence that consumed his brothers. Instead, he had spent his time observing, studying, trying to understand the mechanics of the judgment that was coming. He knew it was close now. Not years away anymore, perhaps not even months. The signs were unmistakable. Birds had stopped singing. Animals were migrating in wrong directions, fleeing toward the mountains as if driven by instinct to seek higher ground. The stars themselves seemed different, their positions slightly altered, as if the celestial spheres were realigning for what was to come. And then he felt it, a presence, multiple presences, powers descending from the higher realms, moving through the celestial gates, entering the earthly sphere with purpose and authority. The archangels had come. From the east came Michael, his form blazing with a light so intense that even looking in his direction caused pain. He was the commander of the heavenly hosts, the great prince who stood for the people of God, and his arrival was like the dawn of a sun that never set. From the west came Gabriel, the strength of God, carrying in his hand a horn whose sound would one day announce the end of all things. His wings were like silver fire, and where he walked, the very air seemed to crystallize into patterns of sacred geometry. From the north came Raphael, the healer, whose presence should have brought comfort, but instead radiated a sorrow so deep it was almost tangible. He wept as he descended, mourning for what was about to be lost, for the beauty of creation that would soon be washed away. From the south came Uriel, the light of God, whose eyes saw everything, whose gaze penetrated to the depths of every heart and laid bare every secret. He carried in his hands the keys to the fountains of the deep, the locks that held back the waters beneath the earth. They descended slowly, deliberately, giving the earth time to witness their arrival. This was not a surprise attack. This was a formal execution carried out with the full authority of heaven, announced beforehand so that none could claim ignorance. The Nephilim who had prepared for war gathered their forces. From across the ravaged landscape they came, abandoning their petty conflicts in the face of this greater threat. Oya rallied his followers in the east. Hahya assembled his army in the west. Gilgamesh fortified his position in the south. Hundreds of giants, perhaps 1,000, converging on the central plain where the archangels had taken their stand. They came armed with the weapons Azazel had taught them to forge. Swords long as ships, spears that could pierce mountains, shields inscribed with protective runes and symbols of power. They wore armor crafted from materials that should not have existed on Earth, metals brought down from celestial forges by their Watcher fathers. And they came with defiance burning in their hearts. If they were to die, they would die fighting. If heaven was to destroy them, heaven would have to work for it. The two forces faced each other across the plain. On one side, the Nephilim, towering and terrible, their numbers vast, their weapons gleaming in the strange light that filtered through the gathering clouds. On the other, 4 angels, seemingly small in comparison, standing calmly as if they had all the time in the world. Oya stepped forward, his voice booming across the distance. We did not ask to be born. We did not choose this existence. Why must we be destroyed for sins committed before our first breath? Michael's response was quiet, but carried with perfect clarity to every ear present. You are not being destroyed for the sins of your fathers. You are being removed because your existence itself is a wound in creation. You carry within you a contradiction that cannot be sustained. The mixing of celestial and earthly nature was never meant to be. It is not punishment. It is correction. The world is being set right. And what of mercy? Cried another giant. What of forgiveness? Are these not attributes of the Most High? Mercy, said Raphael, his voice heavy with grief, is being offered to those who can receive it. The humans who survive will be given a new beginning. The earth itself will be cleansed and restored. Even your fathers, the Watchers, will eventually face judgment and be given their final sentence. But you exist in a state that cannot continue. Your spirits will endure, but your bodies must return to the elements from which they should never have been formed. Then come and take them, Hahia roared. We will not go quietly into your flood. We will fight for every moment of existence we have left. The giants charged. The sound of their approach was like thunder rolling across the plain. The earth shook beneath their feet. They raised their weapons, and war cries that had terrorized humanity for generations now turned toward heaven itself. The archangels did not move. They simply stood, watching the wave of giants rushing toward them, and in their eyes was not fear but something closer to pity. When the Nephilim were nearly upon them, Michael raised his hand. Not dramatically, not with any great gesture, but simply lifted it as one might when signaling a halt. The giants stopped. Not by choice, but because they could not move forward. An invisible barrier had formed in the air, a wall of celestial power that their momentum could not overcome. They pressed against it, straining, roaring in frustration, but they might as well have been pushing against the foundations of the earth itself. You cannot fight what you cannot comprehend, Michael said. Your strength is great by earthly standards, but we are not earthly beings. We exist in dimensions you cannot perceive, operate according to laws your fathers abandoned when they fell. This battle was decided before it began. Gabriel raised the horn to his lips and blew a single note. The sound was not loud, but it carried a weight that went beyond physical vibration. It resonated in the bones of the earth, in the deep places beneath the surface, where ancient waters had been sealed since the third day of creation. The fountains of the deep began to open. At first, it was just water seeping up through cracks in the ground. Then springs bursting forth with increasing pressure. Then geysers erupting with such force that they threw earth and stone hundreds of feet into the air. The plain where the armies faced each other became a lake in minutes. Water poured from below, cold and dark and relentless. The Nephilim stumbled backward, their formations breaking as the ground beneath them turned to mud, then to swamp, then to open water. Fight it, Oya commanded. Do not let water defeat you. Stand your ground. But there was no ground left to stand on. The water was rising faster than they could retreat, swirling around their ankles, then their knees, then their waists. And still it climbed. Uriel opened the windows of heaven. Rain began to fall, not in drops but in sheets, solid walls of water descending from the sky. It fell with such force that where it struck the earth, it created craters. It fell without pause, without variation, a deluge that turned day into a kind of twilight, even though the sun had not yet set. The Nephilim tried to fight. They swung their massive weapons at the angels, but the blades passed through their targets as if cutting smoke. They attempted to use the sorcery their fathers had taught them, speaking words of power, invoking ancient names, but their voices were drowned out by the roar of falling water. Some tried to flee. They turned and ran, their long strides carrying them miles with each step, but the water followed. It rose everywhere simultaneously, as if the entire world was filling like a cup. There was nowhere to run to, no high ground that the flood would not reach. Gabriel and Raphael moved among them, not attacking but guiding. They were shepherding the judgment, ensuring that it proceeded according to divine order, that every Nephilim was accounted for, that none escaped through some hidden path or forgotten gate. The Watchers, the fathers of the Nephilim, emerged from their hiding places. They had remained apart from the wars, watching their sons destroy each other from a distance, too ashamed or too proud to intervene. But now, seeing the judgment fall, they tried to act. Shemihaza attempted to fly to his son's aid, to shield Oya and Hahia from the rising waters. But Michael was waiting. The archangel moved with speed that made the Watcher's flight seem like slow motion. A hand on Shemihaza's chest, a word spoken in the language of creation, and the fallen angel was bound. Chains of light wrapped around him, pulling him down not into the water but into the earth itself. The ground opened beneath him, and he was dragged into darkness, into the valleys and caverns deep beneath the surface where the rebellious angels would be imprisoned until the final judgment. One by one, the watchers were captured and bound. Azazel fought the hardest, wielding weapons of his own making, striking at Uriel with blades that could cut the fabric of reality itself. But celestial weapons, wielded by a fallen angel, could not match celestial authority, wielded by one who had remained faithful. Uriel disarmed him with a touch, and Azazel joined his brothers in the depths. Barakel sought out Mahweh one last time. The watcher found his son standing calmly in the rising water, making no attempt to flee or fight. "Why do you not run?" Barakel asked, his voice breaking. "Use what I taught you. Fly to the highest mountain. There must be somewhere beyond the reach of this flood." "There is nowhere, Father," Mahweh replied. "Enoch told me the truth. This is not a local disaster. This is a global reset. Every mountain will be covered, every valley filled. There is no escape because escape was never an option. We were doomed from conception. All we can choose now is how we face the end." "Then I have failed you," Barakel whispered. "I brought you into existence only to suffer and die." "What kind of father does that?" "The kind who loved unwisely," Mahweh said, and there was no anger in his voice, only sadness. "You wanted to give humanity knowledge, to elevate them, to share the wonders of heaven with the earth. But some gifts are too great for mortal hands, and some unions should never occur, no matter how much love drives them. Go now, Father. Your judgment awaits, and I would rather remember you as you are than see you dragged into the abyss." Raphael came for Barakel then, gentle but inexorable. The watcher did not resist. He allowed himself to be bound, casting one last look at his son before the earth swallowed him. The water continued to rise. It was at the giants' chests now, then their shoulders, then their necks. Some of the Nephilim had climbed onto each other's shoulders, creating towers of living bodies in a desperate attempt to keep their heads above water. But the flood rose faster than they could climb. Oya and Hahia found each other in the chaos. The twins who had been at war just days before now clung to each other as the water closed over their heads. Their last words to each other were lost to the roar of the deluge, but those who witnessed it said that in that final moment the anger between them dissolved, replaced by the bond they had shared before. Pride and fear had driven them apart. Gilgamesh tried to swim, his powerful limbs propelling him upward as the water climbed higher and higher. He breached the surface again and again, gasping for air, refusing to surrender. Even when the highest mountains disappeared beneath the waves, he kept swimming, kept fighting, until finally his strength gave out and he slipped beneath the surface for the last time. Hobabish, whose strength had been legendary even among the Nephilim, managed to reach a mountain peak that remained above water for a few hours longer than the rest. He stood there alone, the last giant visible above the flood, and he raised his voice in a cry that echoed across the endless ocean the world had become. "I existed," he shouted to the empty sky. "I lived, I felt, I thought, I was real." And then the water took him too. Mahweh was among the last to go under. He had not fled, had not fought, had simply stood in place and let the flood come to him. As the water rose past his eyes, he thought of his father's teachings about the stars, about the celestial pathways, about the structure of creation. He thought about the question that had haunted him his entire existence. What were the Nephilim for? What purpose did their brief, violent lives serve? And in his final moment, as his lungs filled with water and his massive body began to shut down, he thought he understood. They were a warning. a sign to all future generations of what happens when the boundaries between realms are violated. They were proof that some knowledge is forbidden for good reason, that some unions should never occur, that the order of creation exists for the protection of all. It was not the answer he had hoped for, but it was an answer. The Book of Giants tells us that the flood lasted 40 days and 40 nights, though time had little meaning in a world covered entirely by water. The rain fell without ceasing. The fountains of the deep poured forth their contents, and everything that breathed air perished, all the Nephilim, all the corrupted creatures they had spawned, all the humans who had not found refuge in the ark that Noah had built according to divine instruction. The archangels remained, walking on the surface of the water as if it were solid ground, ensuring that the judgment was complete. They watched as the last of the giants disappeared beneath the waves. They witnessed the final moments of a race that should never have existed. And when it was done, when every Nephilim had drowned, when the earth had been scoured clean of their presence, the angels turned their attention to what came next. Because the bodies were dead, but the spirits remained, and the true horror of the Nephilim's curse was only beginning. Chapter 9. The Spirits That Never Rest. The waters receded slowly, taking nearly a year to drain away into the renewed ocean basins and reformed river valleys. As the flood withdrew, it revealed a world transformed. Mountains had been ground smooth. Valleys had been filled in. The entire geography of the earth had been reshaped by the violence of the deluge. And scattered across this new landscape were the bodies of the Nephilim. Massive corpses, already beginning to decay, too enormous to be moved or buried by the small number of humans who had survived in Noah's Ark. They lay where they had fallen, monuments to a race that should never have been. But something else lay scattered across the earth as well. Something invisible to normal sight, but terrifyingly real to anyone with spiritual perception. The spirits of the dead giants. The Book of Giants tells us what happened in the moment of their deaths. As each Nephilim drowned, as their massive bodies shut down and their last breath bubbled away into the floodwaters, their spirits, the celestial component inherited from their Watcher fathers, did not depart. They could not ascend to heaven. That realm was forever barred to them. They could not descend to the resting place of human souls. They were not fully human. They were trapped between, caught in a state of existence that had no precedent in creation. And they were hungry. The spirits of the Nephilim found themselves in a kind of twilight existence. They could perceive the physical world, but not fully interact with it. They could see the living, but not touch them directly. They had consciousness, memory, desire, but no body through which to satisfy those desires. The hunger they had felt in life, that gnawing, never-satisfied appetite that had driven them to consume entire herds, entire villages, did not die with their bodies. If anything, it intensified. Because now they hungered not just for food, but for physical existence itself. They discovered quickly that while they could not maintain physical form, they could, under certain circumstances, inhabit the bodies of living creatures. It required strength, concentration, and a host whose will was weak enough to be overcome. But it was possible. The first possessions were of animals. A spirit would enter a bird or a goat or a wild dog, taking control of its movements, using its body to experience physical sensation once more. But animal bodies were too small, too limited. The consciousness of a being who had once stood 500 feet tall could not be satisfied with the sensory experience of a creature that barely reached knee height on a human. So they turned their attention to humanity. The Book of Giants describes the terror that gripped the surviving humans when they began to realize what was happening. People would suddenly change, their eyes taking on a distant, hungry look, their voices dropping several octaves, their strength increasing to levels no human should possess. They would speak in languages no one had taught them, describe things they could not have witnessed, react to events from before the flood as if they were recent memories. These were the first cases of demonic possession. Not possessions by Satan or his fallen angels. Those beings had their own purposes and methods, but by the wandering spirits of the Nephilim, desperate to feel physical existence again, to satisfy hungers that could never truly be sated. The spirits learned that they could do more than just possess. They could influence. A whisper in the right ear at the right moment could turn a person toward violence. A suggestion planted in a dream could lead someone to abandon their family, their faith, their reason. The Nephilim spirits became experts in manipulation, in finding the cracks in human psychology and exploiting them. They discovered that they could affect the physical world indirectly, moving objects by inhabiting them briefly, creating sounds by vibrating the air, manifesting cold or heat through the manipulation of spiritual energy. They became what humanity would later call poltergeists, malevolent spirits who tormented the living out of jealousy and rage. But their greatest power and their greatest torment was their knowledge. They still possessed everything their Watcher fathers had taught them, the secrets of sorcery, of enchantment, of forbidden wisdom, and they could share this knowledge with humans who were willing to listen. Thus began the long, dark tradition of humans seeking power through contact with evil spirits. Mediums who claimed to speak with the dead were often, unknowingly, channeling the spirits of the Nephilim. Sorcerers who performed rituals to gain supernatural abilities were frequently making pacts with these wandering souls. Mystery schools that promised enlightenment through secret knowledge were sometimes fronts for the dissemination of the very teachings that had corrupted the antediluvian world. The spirits of the Nephilim became the demons of legend. They were the voices that tempted saints in the wilderness. They were the invisible forces that caused madness and disease. They were the spiritual parasites that attached themselves to places of violence and suffering, feeding on the negative energy produced there. But they were not happy. They were not satisfied with this existence. The Book of Giants makes this clear. Every moment of their spiritual existence was torment. They longed for the physical bodies they had lost. They yearned for the ability to eat, to drink, to feel solid ground beneath their feet. They raged against the fate that had trapped them in this in-between state. Jewish tradition teaches that these spirits roam the earth in vast numbers, searching endlessly for rest they will never find. They cannot die. Their angelic component makes them essentially immortal. They cannot ascend. Heaven is closed to them. They cannot descend to final punishment that awaits the last judgment. They can only wander, age after age, era after era, causing what havoc they can, seeking what satisfaction they can find in tormenting the living. The Apostle Paul would later write about this reality, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places." He was describing, among other things, the ongoing influence of the Nephilim spirits, the invisible war that has raged since the flood receded. The Book of Enoch provides additional details about their fate. It tells us that these spirits are allowed to afflict humanity as a test, a trial, a way of strengthening faith and revealing character. But their power is limited. They cannot possess or harm anyone who does not, in some way, open the door to their influence. They can tempt, suggest, whisper, but they cannot compel. And they know that their time is finite. When the final judgment comes, when heaven and earth are remade and all things are set right, they will face their ultimate sentence. The Book of Giants suggests that this final punishment will be more terrible than anything they have experienced, so far an eternal separation from all existence, a state of conscious obliteration that is neither death nor life, but something worse than either. Until then, they wait. They wander, they torment, and they remember. They remember what it was like to walk the earth as giants. They remember the taste of food, the feel of sunlight on skin, the simple pleasure of breathing air. They remember their fathers, the Watchers, now imprisoned in darkness beneath the earth. They remember their brothers, the other Nephilim, scattered across the spiritual realm, each trapped in their own private torment. And they hate. They hate the God who created them only to destroy them. They hate the humans who survived when they did not. They hate the archangels who executed the judgment. They hate the created order that has no place for them. Most of all, they hate themselves for being what they are, for existing in a state that should not exist. This hatred drives everything they do. Every possession, every temptation, every act of spiritual warfare is fueled by a rage that has burned for millennia and will burn until the end of time. But there is another tradition, preserved in fragments and whispered among scholars of ancient texts. It suggests that not all the Nephilim spirits turned to pure evil, that some, like Mawe, retained a measure of their original character, that they wander not in hatred but in sorrow, mourning for what they were and what they might have been. These spirits, the legend says, do not possess or torment. They simply watch, invisible witnesses to human history, observing without interfering, waiting for the end they know must come. Sometimes they are encountered by humans with spiritual sensitivity, fleeting presences that carry an overwhelming sadness, a grief so deep it seems to permeate the very air. Whether this tradition has any truth to it, no one can say with certainty. The canonical texts do not speak of repentant Nephilim spirits. But the idea persists, a small thread of hope woven into an otherwise dark tapestry. What we know for certain is this: the spirits remain. They have been with humanity since the flood. They are the unseen forces behind much of the darkness that manifests in the world. They are the demons that religious traditions across cultures have recognized and named. They are the enemies against which spiritual warriors have battled throughout history. And they will remain until the very end, when the words spoken by Enoch so long ago finally come to complete fulfillment. Until the day of the great judgment, wherein they shall be judged and made an end of. That day has not yet come. The spirits of the Nephilim still walk the earth, invisible but active, powerless over those who resist them, but influential to those who listen. The Book of Giants ends not with victory, but with a warning. The war that began before the flood has never truly ended. It simply changed form. The giants are gone, but their spirits remain. And every generation must choose whether to resist their influence or succumb to it. The choice, as it has always been, is ours. Chapter 10. Why this book was buried. The fragments of the Book of Giants lay scattered in the sand for nearly 2,000 years before they were discovered. During all that time, the stories it contained were not completely lost. Whispers of them survived in other traditions, in Manichaean texts from Persia, in rabbinic commentaries, in the secret teachings passed down through esoteric schools. But the book itself, the original source, remained hidden. Why? If the Book of Enoch could be preserved, copied, and read openly in early Jewish and Christian communities, why was the Book of Giants treated so differently? Why was it not just excluded from the canon, but seemingly erased from existence? The answer lies in what the book reveals about the nature of evil, suffering, and divine justice. Questions that make religious authorities uncomfortable. Truths that do not fit neatly into theological frameworks. The Book of Enoch presents a clear narrative. Angels rebelled, they were punished, their offspring were destroyed, order was restored. It is a story with a beginning, middle, and end. a story that reinforces the supremacy of divine authority and the consequences of disobedience. The Book of Giants complicates that narrative. It gives voices to the condemned. It shows us their thoughts, their fears, their desperate attempts to understand why they must be destroyed for circumstances beyond their control. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about inherited guilt, about beings created into impossible situations, about the justice of punishing the children for the sins of their fathers. These are dangerous questions, not because they have no answers, but because the answers challenge simplistic understandings of good and evil. The early church fathers were building a unified theology. They needed clear distinctions between the righteous and the wicked, between those who would be saved and those who would be damned. The Book of Giants blurred those distinctions. It showed that the line between monster and victim was not always clear, that beings could be simultaneously guilty and tragic, that destruction could be both just and heartbreaking. This ambiguity was unacceptable. So the book was quietly set aside. But there was another reason, perhaps even more significant. The Book of Giants provided too much detail about the origin of demons. It gave them names, histories, motivations. It explained where evil spirits came from and why they behave as they do. For a religious establishment trying to maintain authority over spiritual matters, this was problematic. If people understood that demons were the spirits of the Nephilim, beings with specific origins and limitations, they might not fear them as much. They might realize that these entities, while dangerous, were not all-powerful. That they were, in fact, trapped and desperate creatures, more pitiable than terrifying. Knowledge reduces fear, and fear is a powerful tool for maintaining religious control. By keeping the origin of demons mysterious, by treating them as incomprehensible forces of pure evil rather than the tormented spirits of a destroyed race, religious authorities maintained their position as necessary intermediaries. Only the priesthood could protect you from demons. Only sacred rituals could keep evil at bay. Only the church could stand between humanity and the forces of darkness. But if you knew that demons were just the wandering spirits of the Nephilim, cursed to roam until the final judgment, unable to harm anyone who did not invite their influence well, that changed the dynamic considerably. The Book of Giants also revealed something else that made religious authorities uncomfortable. It showed that the Watchers had taught genuine knowledge to their children. Not everything the fallen angels passed down was evil or corrupted. Some of it was simply knowledge, understanding of the stars, of natural forces, of the structure of creation. This suggested that wisdom could come from tainted sources, that truth could be found in unexpected places, that the world was more complex than a simple division between divine revelation and satanic deception. For institutions that claimed exclusive access to sacred knowledge, this was threatening. If the fallen angels possessed real understanding of creation, if their teachings contained actual truth mixed with corruption, then perhaps other sources of wisdom, pagan philosophies, mystery religions, scientific investigation might also contain genuine insights, despite their non-orthodox origins. Better to suppress the entire book than to risk people drawing such conclusions. There were also practical considerations. The Book of Giants depicted the Nephilim engaging in organized warfare, using strategy and tactics, building fortifications and forging advanced weapons. It showed them as intelligent, capable beings who nearly succeeded in creating their own civilization. This was uncomfortable for another reason. It suggested that rebellion against divine order could achieve significant results, at least temporarily. That defiance could build kingdoms, wage wars, accomplish great works even if those accomplishments were ultimately destroyed. Religious teaching emphasized the futility of rebellion. Sin leads nowhere. Disobedience brings only destruction. But the Book of Giants showed that this was not entirely true. The Nephilim built cities. They mastered technologies. They ruled vast territories. Yes, they were eventually destroyed, but they had a century to create and achieve before the flood came. This was a dangerous message for institutions trying to maintain obedience among their followers. Much better to present rebellion as immediately futile rather than as something that might succeed for a time before eventual judgment. Perhaps the most threatening aspect of the Book of Giants was its portrayal of divine justice as tragic rather than triumphant. The book does not celebrate the destruction of the Nephilim, it mourns it. It shows us beings who suffered for circumstances they did not create, who were born into an impossible situation and condemned from their first breath. This raised profound theological questions. If God is all-knowing, he knew before the Watchers descended what the consequences would be. He knew that the Nephilim would be born. He knew they would have to be destroyed. Why allow it to happen at all? The Book of Giants does not answer this question directly, but it forces us to ask it. And that alone made it dangerous. Religious authorities prefer narratives where God's justice is clear and uncomplicated, where the wicked are punished and the righteous are saved, and there is no ambiguity about who belongs in which category. The Book of Giants presents a situation where the calculus is not so simple, where justice requires the destruction of beings who are simultaneously guilty and innocent, where the right course of action still produces tragedy. These complexities did not fit the theological frameworks being constructed in the early centuries of Christianity. They did not support the clear moral teachings that the Church wanted to promulgate. They opened doors to doubt, to questioning, to the kind of nuanced thinking that makes religious authority harder to maintain. So the book was buried, not through any single decree or dramatic act of suppression, but through simple neglect. Copies were not made. It was not included in any official canon. References to it in other texts were minimal. Over time, it simply faded from circulation. Only in the remote deserts of Qumran, where the Essenes preserved texts that mainstream Judaism had abandoned, did fragments survive. And even those fragments were incomplete, scattered, requiring decades of scholarly work to piece together. What we have now is perhaps 1/3 of the original text. Maybe less. Entire sections are missing. Key passages exist only as isolated sentences. The full narrative, as it was originally written, may be lost forever. But even in its fragmentary state, the Book of Giants retains its power. It still asks the uncomfortable questions. It still challenges simplistic notions of good and evil. It still forces us to confront the tragedy inherent in divine justice. And perhaps that is why, even now, it remains controversial. Modern scholars debate its significance. Religious leaders rarely mention it. It exists on the margins of biblical studies, acknowledged but not embraced, studied but not celebrated. The book that was buried in the sand for 2,000 years remains, in many ways, buried still. Not physically, but theologically. Not hidden, but ignored. Available to those who seek it, but rarely brought into the light of mainstream religious discourse, because the questions it raises are still dangerous. The truths it reveals are still uncomfortable, and the world, it seems, is still not ready to fully confront what the Book of Giants has to say about the nature of existence, the complexity of justice, and the price paid by those who are born into sin not of their own making. The Nephilim are gone. Their bodies decayed millennia ago, but the questions they embodied remain. And until we are willing to face those questions honestly, the Book of Giants will continue to be what it has always been: a forbidden text, a buried truth, a voice crying out from fragments in the desert, asking to be heard but never quite breaking through into the mainstream of religious thought. Perhaps one day that will change. Perhaps future generations will be ready to confront the full implications of this ancient text. Perhaps the time will come when we can acknowledge the tragedy of the Nephilim without undermining our faith, when we can mourn their destruction while still affirming its necessity, when we can hold complexity and certainty in the same hand. Until then, the Book of Giants remains what it has always been, a warning, a testimony, and a reminder that the world is more complicated than we often want to admit. The story has been told, the fragments have been opened. The voices of the Nephilim, silent for so long, have spoken once more through the words preserved in desert caves and ancient manuscripts. It is a heavy story, a tragic story, a story of beings caught between worlds, condemned for existing, destroyed because they could not help being what they were born to be. But it is also a story with a purpose, a warning carved in stone and written in blood, a reminder that some boundaries exist for good reason, that the order of creation, for all its mysteries, serves to protect and sustain life, that when those boundaries are violated, even with the best intentions, the consequences can be catastrophic. The Nephilim were mighty. They possessed strength beyond measure, knowledge beyond human comprehension, power that shaped the very landscape of the earth. Yet all of that meant nothing in the face of divine judgment. Their size could not save them. Their weapons could not defend them. Their wisdom could not show them a path to survival, because they were fighting against something more fundamental than any enemy. They were fighting against the basic structure of reality itself. And that is a battle that cannot be won. We live in a world where the spirits of the Nephilim still wander, where the consequences of that ancient rebellion still manifest, where the hunger that drove the giants to destruction still whispers in the darkness, seeking those who will listen. But we also live in a world that was cleansed, that was given a new beginning, that emerged from the waters of judgment into a covenant of promise. The flood that destroyed the Nephilim also washed the earth clean, creating space for humanity to begin again. And we are not without protection. The same archangels who executed judgment on the giants still watch over creation. Michael still stands guard. Gabriel still carries divine messages. Raphael still brings healing. Uriel still illuminates the darkness. More than that, each of us has been given a guardian, an angel appointed to watch over us, to shield us from the wandering spirits that would do us harm. They stand between us and the Nephilim's curse, invisible but ever present, faithful in their duty, even when we do not acknowledge their presence. As you prepare for sleep tonight, know that you are protected. The spirits that roam the earth have no power over those who walk in the light. The demons born from the giants' destruction cannot touch those who are covered by divine grace. Close your eyes now. Let the weight of this story settle, not as a burden but as understanding. Let it remind you that evil has a history, a beginning, and therefore an end. That darkness, no matter how ancient or powerful, cannot overcome the light. Breathe slowly. Feel the tension leaving your body. The battles described in this story are not yours to fight. They were fought long ago, and they were won. Your task is simply to rest, to trust, to allow yourself to be held by powers greater than any giant ever possessed. The Nephilim are gone, their bodies returned to dust, their spirits bound by divine decree, unable to harm those who resist them. The world they sought to rule has moved on, generation after generation, carrying forward despite the scars they left behind. And you are part of that forward movement, part of the continuing story, part of the testimony that darkness can be overcome, that judgment can lead to renewal, that even from the greatest catastrophes, hope can emerge. So rest now. Let sleep come gently. The night is not empty, it is filled with watchers who never sleep, guardians who never tire, a presence that has sustained creation since before the Nephilim walked the earth and will sustain it long after their last spirit is finally laid to rest. The Book of Giants has been read, its warnings have been heard, its truths have been acknowledged. Now let it fade into the background of your consciousness as you drift towards sleep, leaving behind only a quiet assurance that the God who judged the giants is the same God who protects you, that the power that sent the flood is the same power that holds you safe, that the justice that destroyed the Nephilim is inseparable from the mercy that covers you tonight. Sleep well, dream peacefully, and know that when you wake, the light will still be shining, the angels will still be watching, and the story will continue your story, humanity's story, the story of a world that survived the giants and will survive whatever comes next. Good night. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his angels guard your path. And may you rest in the knowledge that you are loved, protected, and never alone.